There are two versions of my sister Jessica. The one who spent her last dollar on my brother's life-saving medicine, and the one who let him die while she finished dessert. This is the story of the second one. The first, Jessica basically raised us. With our mom gone, she made our lunches, signed our permission slips, and bought my brother Mason his expensive EpiPens with her waitressing money. But I had seen glimpses of the other Jessica, which is why last week I secretly used my savings to buy a second EpiPen and hid it in his backpack. She was furious when she found out. "You don't trust me?" she snapped, her eyes flashing. "I'm the only one who knows how to take care of him." She didn't get it. I just wanted a backup. And then last Saturday, I was babysitting Mason when it happened. We were at the park and a kid shared his granola bar. Mason was 6 bites in when his face started swelling. "Where's your EpiPen?" I asked, my hands already digging in his backpack for the one I hid. His eyes went wide with panic. "Jessica has it. She said she'd bring it." My stomach dropped. She was supposed to meet us at noon. It was 12:17. I called her immediately. "This better be important." Her voice was sharp. "Mason's having a reaction? Where are you with his EpiPen?" "I'm on a date, finally, after 3 years." "Jessica, he ate peanuts. His throat is closing." "Are you kidding me right now? You're supposed to be there with his medication." "I'm supposed to be 22 and having a life." "This is the first time James could get reservations at this place. He needs his EpiPen now." "I've been raising you kids since I was 16. 16! This is the only afternoon I've had to myself in months." "Jessica, please." "No, I'm tired of this. Every time I try to be happy, something happens. Every single time." She hung up. Frantically, I ripped open the backpack, searching for the second pen. But it wasn't there. She must have found it and taken it. At 12:23, Mason collapsed. His lips were blue. A mom at the park screamed and called 911 while I held him, feeling his tiny chest barely moving. My fingers fumbled as I called Jessica again, my voice tearing. "He's unconscious. He's turning blue." "Stop being so dramatic," she sighed, the clinking of cutlery audible over the line. "You always do this when I'm finally doing something for myself. This is an emergency," I screamed, my throat raw. "Everything's an emergency when I'm not available. Funny how that works." The paramedics arrived at 12:31. The EMT's face went pale when she checked his airways. "He needs epinephrine now. You don't have any?" My voice was a choked whisper. "My sister has it. She's coming." But she wasn't. At 12:35, sobbing, I tried her again. The paramedic, seeing the desperation in my eyes, gently took the phone from my shaking hand. "Ma'am, this is Paramedic Stevens. Your brother is in anaphylactic shock. His airways are closing. We need that EpiPen immediately." Jessica's response was loud enough for the kind mom from the park and the other EMT to hear. "I've been his mother since our actual mother checked out. Don't you lecture me about what he needs." "Ma'am, he will die without it. I haven't had a real date in 3 years. 3 years. I deserve 2 hours to be a normal person. I'll leave when dessert's done." At 12:42, they were intubating him in the back of the ambulance. His little body was so still. The EMT kept checking her watch, then his vitals, then her watch again. At 12:48, his heart stopped. The alarm blared, a piercing shriek in the cramped space. They got it going again, but the look in the EMT's eyes told me everything I needed to know. "How far is your sister?" she asked softly. I pulled out my phone and texted Jessica a photo of Mason on the stretcher, tubes everywhere. "He's dying." Her reply came back almost instantly. "This is exactly why I never get to be happy. I finally meet someone and you ruin it. James just asked why I'm crying. Thanks for that. I'll come when we're done eating." Jessica finally showed up at the ER at 1:33 p.m. Her perfect makeup was ruined by streaks of tears, but they weren't for Mason. They were tears of frustration. Her date, James, had just dropped her off. She threw the EpiPen bag at the nurse. "Here, happy now? He thinks I'm some teen mom. Date's ruined." Just then, a doctor emerged, his scrubs still bloody. He looked from Jessica's furious face to my numb one. "We need to discuss organ donation." Jessica laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "What? Just give him the shot. The doctor's voice was grim. Ma'am, your brother went 51 minutes without epinephrine. He's brain dead. Jessica's head whipped toward me, her grief instantly curdling into venom. This is your fault. You were watching him. You had his EpiPen, I whispered, the words feeling like glass in my throat. You were supposed to be there. I'm always supposed to be there. When do I get to live? When is it my turn? She turned to the doctor. I gave up everything for these kids. Everything. My college, my 20s, my entire life. And the one time I take 3 hours for myself. She was already pulling out her phone. I need to call my mom's lawyer. The paramedics should have had their own epinephrine. At 2:45 p.m., they unplugged the machines. Mason died at 6 years old because his protector chose a date over his life. I sat with his body for 3 hours. It felt wrong to leave him alone in that cold building. Jessica never came back. She didn't call. She texted once, a few minutes after they declared him gone. James doesn't want to date someone with baggage. Thanks for ruining the only good thing in my life. That's when I decided. I wasn't just going to bury my baby brother. I was going to bury her too. I looked at the phone in my hand, at her callous, time-stamped texts. She had just given me the shovel. The hospital chapel was empty and cold at 3 a.m, but I couldn't leave Mason's body alone in that basement morgue. My phone screen hurt my eyes in the dark as I scrolled through Jessica's texts from earlier. Thanks for ruining the only good thing in my life. Each word was a lit match against my skin. Every single message she sent while Mason was dying needed to be saved before she could delete them or claim she never said those things. My fingers were shaking, but my mind was icily clear. Then I emailed copies to myself at 2 different email addresses. My laptop was at home, so I found a public computer in the deserted family waiting area and created a new folder labeled simply Evidence. The keyboard keys clicked too loud in the quiet hallway as I typed out everything I could remember, forcing myself to be a machine, a court stenographer for my own tragedy. Mason's reaction begins. First call to Jessica. 12:31 p.m. Paramedics arrive. They need the EpiPen she has. 12:48 p.m. Mason's heart stops. They revive him, but the damage is done. 1:33 p.m. Jessica arrives at ER, 76 minutes after the first call, complaining about her ruined date. I wrote down every word I could recall her saying, every excuse she made, every single time she chose a restaurant over her brother's life. As I typed, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Catalina Arias, the mom from the park. I can't stop thinking about what happened. Please let me know if you are okay. I called her right there in the hospital hallway, the fluorescent lights humming above me. It was past 3 a.m, but she answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleeplessness. I asked if she would be willing to write down what she saw and heard, specifically what she heard when the paramedic had my phone. Oh, honey, of course, she said immediately. I can still hear that woman's voice through the speaker. I'll leave when dessert's done. It made me sick to my stomach. I'll write down every detail I can remember and email it to you by morning. The next morning, I waited until exactly 9 a.m. before calling Jessica. I wanted her to be fully awake for this. I triple-checked online. One-party consent for recording calls was legal in our state. I hit record before I dialed. She answered with a voice rough from crying, or maybe drinking. I told her we needed to talk about Mason's funeral arrangements. It was like flipping a switch. My fault? She started screaming, her voice escalating into a hysterical shriek. You think you can talk to me about funerals when this is your fault for not watching him properly? I sacrificed everything for you kids. I was 16. Do you have any idea what that's like? I gave up college. I gave up my entire 20s to be your mother. I let her rant, holding the phone slightly away from my ear as her venom poured out. I stayed completely silent, letting the recording capture every word. I finally meet someone, she sobbed. Someone good who doesn't know I'm raising 3 kids, and you rip it away from me. You couldn't handle it for 2 hours. Did you know he was dying when I called? I asked, my voice flat and cold. Of course I knew he was dying, she screamed back without a second of hesitation. You made that perfectly clear, didn't you? Ruining my one chance at a normal life. Everything is always an emergency with you. When she finally stopped yelling to catch her breath, I said, "The funeral home needs decisions today." She hung up on me. But it didn't matter. I had everything I needed. I spent the next 6 hours at my kitchen table, the recording of her voice echoing in my head. My laptop was open, and I typed 2 phrases into the search bar: child endangerment, negligent homicide. The legal definitions matched what Jessica did to Mason, point by point. Knowingly placing a child in a situation that poses a threat to their life or health. Failure to act when a child is in obvious distress. Causing a death through criminal negligence. Ignoring an obvious and deadly risk. Every website I found, from legal blogs to state statutes, said the same thing about duty of care. A duty she had confessed to, then bragged about abandoning, all on a crystal clear recording. The CPS website had a hotline number. It was open 24 hours a day. I picked up my phone, my folder of screenshots, and the new recording open in front of me, and I began to dial. The woman on the CPS hotline had a calm, procedural voice that was the perfect anchor against the storm in my head. I spent over an hour on the phone with her, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by the architecture of my brother's last day. I read Jessica's texts word for word while the worker typed them into her system. I gave her every timestamp I had documented. She asked about our living situation, and I explained how Jessica had been our legal guardian since our mom left years ago, a fact that now felt like a cruel joke. The worker gave me a case number and told me 2 things that would define my next steps. An investigator would contact me within 48 hours, and I should file a police report immediately. The police station smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. The officer at the front desk looked tired, his eyes glazed over with the kind of weariness that comes from seeing the worst of the city day after day. He seemed dismissive at first, handing me a form as if I were there to report a stolen bike. I didn't fill it out. Instead, I placed my phone on the counter and played him 10 seconds of Jessica's recorded phone call. Of course I knew he was dying, her voice shrieked from the tiny speaker. The officer's posture changed. He stood up straighter, his eyes losing their glaze. He took my folder of evidence, flipping through the time-stamped screenshots, his expression hardening with each page. He called over a sergeant, a stern-looking woman with graying hair, who looked at everything and said, "This needs to go to the detective unit. Now." They took my formal statement in a small, windowless room. It took almost 3 hours. I recounted every detail, from the granola bar to Jessica's final cruel text about her ruined date. The detective, a man named Wallace, listened patiently, his pen scratching across his notepad. He took copies of all my screenshots, the audio file of the call, and Catalina's contact information. He gave me a case number and a business card, telling me not to speak to Jessica and that he would be in touch. The 2 days that followed were a special kind of hell. A silent, anxious void where every buzz of my phone made me jump. I kept replaying the events, the detective's questions, wondering if I'd said enough, if they truly understood the profound selfishness that had killed my brother. My anger had been a fuel, but now, in the quiet, the grief came back in waves, so sharp and heavy it felt like I was drowning. During that time, Jessica launched her own offensive, not through the law, but through social media. She posted a picture of herself with Mason from a few years ago, his arms wrapped around her neck, both of them smiling. The caption was a novel of self-pity and curated victimhood. "My heart is shattered," it began. "I can't believe my sweet baby brother is gone. I have dedicated my life to these kids ever since our mother left us. I gave up college, friends, my entire youth to be their rock. And now, in my darkest hour of grief, I am being attacked and slandered by my own family. Ungrateful lies are being spread to tear me down when all I ever did was sacrifice. Please pray for me as I navigate this unimaginable pain." Her friends flooded the comments with hearts and support. "You're a saint, Jess. We know how much you gave up for them. Don't listen to the haters." I took a screenshot of the post and every single comment, my stomach turning. I added them to my evidence file under a new tab, Narrative Manipulation. 2 days after my police station visit, my phone rang. "This is Judith Sterling from Child Protective Services," a professional voice said. "I've been assigned Mason's case. I need to schedule a home visit to speak with you. I also need to speak with Jessica and your younger sister, Gianna. We set it for the next day. I spent that whole night organizing everything into a 3-ring binder. I made tabs for everything. Texts from Jessica, recorded call, timeline, witness statement, see Arias, social media posts. It felt like a final exam I couldn't afford to fail. Judith Sterling showed up exactly on time, a thick folder under her arm and a tablet for taking notes. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, her eyes sharp and analytical. She interviewed me for 2 solid hours, going through every piece of evidence. She took photos of the screenshots with her tablet and listened to the entire recording of Jessica's call, her expression unreadable. Then she asked the question that changed the entire focus of my grief. Tell me about your younger sister, Gianna. She's 8, correct? And she is still living at home with Jessica? I explained that Gianna was at a friend's house, but that yes, she lived under Jessica's care. As Judith reviewed the evidence again, this time through the lens of a living 8-year-old girl still in that house, her face grew visibly more serious. The clinical professionalism cracked, revealing a deep, focused concern. I'm implementing an immediate safety plan, she said, her voice firm, effective now. Jessica is not to be left alone with Gianna until our investigation is complete. All visits must be supervised. Someone else, a family member or a court-approved supervisor, must be present at all times. Do you understand? It was the first time since Mason had collapsed that I felt like I could take a full breath. It wasn't justice, not yet. But it was protection. It was a consequence. The call from the funeral home came 3 days after Mason died, a practical intrusion into the chaos. Jessica and I couldn't agree on anything. She wanted a large, open casket viewing, an event where she could cry and tell everyone how hard her life had been. She wanted to be the star of the tragedy. I wanted something small, private, a quiet service to actually honor the sweet little boy who loved Legos and superhero cartoons, not to provide a stage for Jessica's victim tour. We ended up planning 2 completely separate viewings. The family was officially, irrevocably broken. The day of the funeral was surreal. I stood in the back of the room watching relatives I hadn't seen in years file in. They split into 2 unspoken groups. Half of them crowded around Jessica, hugging her, holding her hands as she sobbed theatrically about how she gave up everything. My Aunt Helen told her she was a saint. The other half came to me quietly, their eyes full of a sad understanding, whispering how sorry they were about Mason. Catalina Arias, the mom from the park, walked in carrying a small bouquet of white flowers. She made her way straight to me, ignoring the spectacle Jessica was creating. She leaned in close and whispered, "I emailed you my full statement this morning. I will testify to whatever you need. What I heard that day, it still makes me sick." The service itself was torture. Jessica was up front wailing about how she'd been more of a mother to Mason than our actual mom ever was. I sat in the back row, my hands clenched into fists, trying not to stand up and scream the truth. Trying not to scream that she killed him for a dinner date. The day after the funeral, I got the call from Detective Wallace. He was brief. The district attorney's office had taken the case and a prosecutor named Brad Wallace would be in touch. It was a confirmation that the system was moving, but the silence that followed was unnerving. In that silence, Jessica struck first. A process server knocked on my door a week later. He handed me a thick envelope containing a petition for a restraining order. My hands shook as I read the allegations. Jessica was claiming I was harassing and stalking her. The petition was a work of fiction, painting me as an unstable, vindictive sibling, dangerously obsessed and unable to accept our brother's tragic accident. It cited my calls about the funeral as harassment and claimed I had threatened her in the grocery store parking lot. She was twisting every action I took to seek justice into an act of aggression. The hearing was in 1 week. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. She was trying to legally gag me, to paint me as an unreliable witness before the criminal case could even begin. My phone rang, and I almost didn't answer the unknown number, but some instinct made me swipe accept. "Is this the sister of Mason?" A calm, professional voice asked. "My name is Alina Sterling. My aunt, Judith Sterling from CPS, mentioned your situation. I'm a family law attorney. I have a feeling you might have just received some intimidating paperwork. I'd like to offer my help pro bono." It felt like a miracle. Alina came to my apartment that evening. She read the restraining order petition, her expression a mixture of calm professionalism and quiet fury. "This is a classic but particularly vile slap tactic," she explained. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to intimidate and silence you by burying you in legal fees and stress. They don't expect to win. They expect you to break." She looked at my binder of evidence, her eyes sharp. "They've made a mistake," she said. "They've given us a formal venue to present our evidence to a judge." The next day, I met with the prosecutor, Brad Wallace. His office was a cramped fortress of case files. I explained the restraining order, and he nodded grimly. "Don't worry," he said. "We see this all the time. It's a desperate act. Consider my office an official supporter of your defense. Any attempt to silence a key witness in a potential homicide case is something we take very seriously." He spent 2 hours going through my evidence, his focus absolute. He explained the high bar for proving negligent homicide but expressed confidence. "Your sister's own words are the strongest evidence we have," he said, tapping the transcript of the recorded call. "The timeline, the witness, the pattern of behavior, it's a strong case. We just have to be patient." The week leading up to the hearing was the longest of my life. Alina and I worked every evening. We prepared a binder for the judge, countering every one of Jessica's lies with a documented fact. We had phone logs showing I only ever contacted her for necessities. We had a copy of Catalina's sworn statement. We had the video of her screaming at me in the parking lot. The anger was a constant fire in my gut. I wasn't sleeping. I was replaying Mason's final moments on a loop. Alina, noticing the dark circles under my eyes and my clenched jaw, gave me the name of a grief counselor, Jonah Weber. "You're fighting a war on two fronts, the legal and the emotional," she said. "You need support on both." My first session with Jonah was 2 days before the hearing. I spent most of it talking about how much I wanted to see Jessica suffer. He listened, his presence a calm anchor in my storm of rage. He didn't tell me not to be angry. Instead, he asked me a question that shifted my entire perspective. "In that courtroom," he said, "what will bring justice for Mason more? Your anger or your clarity?" He taught me breathing exercises, ways to ground myself, to state facts without letting Jessica's inevitable performance provoke me. I was preparing not just my evidence, but my mind. The courtroom was small and cold. Jessica was sitting beside her expensive lawyer, dressed in a conservative black dress, her face a mask of tearful fragility. She looked like the victim. When it was her turn, she took the stand and cried, telling the judge she was terrified of me, that my obsession was making it impossible for her to grieve her beloved brother. Her lawyer argued that I was unstable, using Mason's death as an excuse to persecute his client. It was sickening. I could feel the rage bubbling up, hot and metallic in my throat. I squeezed my hands together, took a breath, and remembered Jonah's words. Clarity. Then it was Alina's turn. She was calm, methodical. She didn't attack Jessica. She simply presented the facts. "Your Honor," she began, "my client is not the aggressor here. She is the primary witness in an ongoing criminal investigation into the death of her 6-year-old brother, Mason. The petitioner, Jessica, is the sole subject of that investigation." A ripple went through the courtroom. Alina presented the timeline of calls on the day Mason died, showing Jessica's refusal to help. She submitted Catalina's statement. She pointed out that every contact my client had made with the petitioner since was through official channels or legal necessity. "As for the allegation of harassment in the parking lot," Alina said, her voice even, "we have a video of the encounter. With the court's permission?" The judge nodded. Alina played the video on a large monitor. The entire courtroom watched as Jessica, the fragile victim, shrieked about her ruined life while I stood in silence, holding my phone. The audio was crystal clear. "Mason's death is your fault." The judge had seen enough. He held up a hand. He looked at Jessica, his expression one of pure contempt. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cold and sharp, "the evidence presented here suggests that you are not a victim of harassment. It suggests you are attempting to use this court to intimidate a witness in a very serious criminal matter. This is an abuse of the legal process." He denied the restraining order with prejudice, meaning she could not file it again. He then turned to her lawyer. "And counsel, I would advise you to think very carefully before bringing such a frivolous and manipulative petition before my court again. You are bordering on sanctions." Jessica's face went from pale to crimson. She stood up abruptly and stormed out of the courtroom, her lawyer scrambling behind her. I sat there frozen as the tension drained out of me, leaving me weak and trembling. Alina put a hand on my shoulder. "We won," she whispered. I took a deep, shuddering breath. It felt like the first clean breath I had taken in weeks. It wasn't the end. It wasn't even close to the end. But it was a victory. It was proof that the truth was more powerful than her performance, and it was enough to keep me fighting. The victory in the restraining order hearing was a double-edged sword. It provided a profound temporary relief, but it also felt like I had cornered a wounded animal. Jessica's public humiliation made her more volatile, more unpredictable. Her social media posts became darker, filled with vague threats and accusations of a vast conspiracy against her. The win was a battle, but the war was escalating. A week later, Brad Wallace called. "The grand jury will convene next month," he said, his tone all business. "I'll be presenting Mason's case, and we will need you to testify." The words hit me like a physical blow. The thought of reliving those moments, the park, the phone calls, the ambulance, the hospital, in front of a room full of strangers was terrifying. A part of me wanted to refuse, to just hide. But Mason deserved to have his story told in court. My sessions with Jonah shifted entirely to preparing for the testimony. He became my sparring partner for the cross-examination I would eventually face. "The defense will try to paint you as emotional, unreliable," he explained. "They will twist your grief into a vendetta. Our job is to make sure your testimony is an unbreakable pillar of fact." Over and over, we practiced. He would play the role of Jessica's lawyer, his questions sharp and cruel. "Weren't you, as the babysitter, ultimately responsible for what a 6-year-old put in his mouth? Isn't it true you've always been jealous of the sacrifices your sister made? Are you telling this jury you expect them to believe your sister, who paid for this boy's medicine her whole life, would suddenly want him to die?" Each question was a dagger. At first, I would get angry, defensive, emotional. But Jonah coached me, teaching me breathing techniques, how to pause, how to answer the question that was asked, and only that question. I learned to let the evidence speak, to anchor my answers in the timeline, in the screenshots, in the recording. I was being forged into the witness Mason needed me to be. In the middle of this preparation, Brad called with another major development. "We're subpoenaing James," he said, referring to the man Jessica had been on a date with. "He's the only direct witness to Jessica's state of mind and actions during the critical window. We need to know what she was saying and doing on her side of those phone calls." James tried everything to avoid it. His lawyer filed a motion to quash the subpoena, claiming his client barely knew Jessica and had no relevant information. The court denied the motion. James had no choice but to show up for a deposition or face contempt charges. I wasn't allowed in the room, but Brad called me the moment it was over. "He fought us on every question," Brad said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. But under oath, the truth came out. He confirmed Jessica received multiple calls from you and that she was aware Mason was having a severe allergic reaction. He admitted that after one of your calls, she told him, "My sister is so dramatic. She always ruins everything." Most importantly, he testified that after the paramedics specifically told her Mason would die, Jessica insisted they stay to order and eat dessert. His testimony obliterates her defense that she didn't understand the severity of the situation. While the legal case was building, Jessica's personal life was continuing to unravel. As if on cue, she handed us another piece of evidence of her negligence. Judith Sterling called me late one night, her voice strained. "Jessica left Gianna home alone again," she said. "She went to a bar with friends. A neighbor saw her leave around 8 p.m. and grew worried. At 10 p.m., Gianna knocked on their door, crying because she was hungry and couldn't get the can opener to work. The neighbor called CPS immediately. Judith had driven over herself and found the house dark, with empty wine bottles on the kitchen counter. Jessica stumbled in at 1 a.m., drunk and furious, to find Judith there documenting everything. Her excuse was that she deserved to have some fun, and that Gianna was old enough to watch herself for a few hours. Judith told me this was exactly what they needed to show a clear and present pattern of neglect, moving the family court case from preservation to intervention. The morning of my grand jury testimony, I threw up twice from nerves. I forced myself to eat toast, dressed in the conservative gray suit Alina had helped me pick out, and drove to the courthouse. I sat in the witness chair for 3 hours. As Brad walked me through the timeline, he projected the evidence onto a large screen for the jurors to see. My screenshots of Jessica's texts, cold and black and white. The photo I'd taken of Mason on the stretcher. Several jurors gasped when they saw it. One woman quietly wiped tears from her eyes. The hardest part was when Brad asked me to read Jessica's texts aloud. My voice shook as I read her words about me ruining her happiness, about finishing her meal. I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift, a palpable wave of disgust and shock. I held Jonah's words in my mind like a shield. Clarity. Stick to the facts, I did. I answered every question truthfully and without speculation, letting the evidence I had so painstakingly collected deliver the emotional impact. The next day, the EMT who had worked on Mason testified. She was a powerful witness, explaining in clear medical terms how anaphylaxis shuts down a body. She confirmed that if Mason had received epinephrine within the first 10 minutes, he would have, in all likelihood, walked away with no permanent damage. Brad asked her directly, "In your professional opinion, was the 76-minute delay in receiving epinephrine a direct cause of Mason's death?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "It was the cause." She also testified to hearing Jessica's voice through my phone's speaker, refusing to leave the restaurant. 2 days later, Brad called. "They returned an indictment," he said simply. "My knees went weak and I had to sit down." The grand jury has formally charged Jessica with 1 count of felony child endangerment resulting in death. He explained that it carried a sentence of up to 10 years in prison, but he carefully managed my expectations. "It's a huge step," he said. "She is now a felony defendant. She will be arrested and processed." That same week, we had the hearing in family court regarding Gianna's custody. Jessica showed up, looking haggard despite her perfectly applied makeup. Her lawyer argued that she was a devoted sister who had made one mistake under stress. But the judge had the CPS reports, the school incident, the neighbor's testimony, and now, the criminal indictment. He cut Jessica's lawyer off mid-sentence. "The evidence here does not show one mistake," the judge said, his voice ringing with authority. "It shows a pattern of profound selfishness and neglect that has already cost one child his life. This court's primary duty is to ensure it does not cost another." He ordered that Jessica's parental rights be suspended. She could only see Gianna during supervised 1-hour visits twice a week at the official CPS facility. A social worker had to be present at all times. Jessica jumped up, screaming that I had stolen her family, that I had poisoned everyone against her. The judge banged his gavel. "You did this to yourself, ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through her tirade. "You chose a date over your brother. These are the consequences." He granted me temporary legal guardianship of Gianna. That evening, as I tucked my little sister into bed in the room that used to be Mason's, I felt the first sense of peace since that day in the park. Gianna was safe. That was a victory no one could ever take away. The indictment felt like a monumental victory, but it also started a clock. Brad Wallace warned me that the legal process was a marathon, not a sprint. We spent months in the pretrial phase. Motions were filed, discovery was exchanged, and a trial date was set for the following spring. Jessica, out on bail, was legally a defendant but personally a ghost. The court had forbidden her from contacting me or Gianna outside of the twice-weekly, 1-hour supervised visits at the CPS facility. Gianna would come back from them quiet and withdrawn, telling her therapist that Jessica spent the whole time complaining about how unfair everything was. Then, 3 weeks before the trial was set to begin, Brad called. "Jessica's attorney reached out," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "They're offering 24A plea deal." "Absolutely not," I said instantly, my blood running cold. "We're going to trial." "Hear the offer first," Brad advised. 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service. I almost threw my phone across the room. Probation? She kills a child and gets probation? How is that justice? I was furious, pacing my small apartment. It felt like a betrayal. After everything we had fought for, she might not spend a single day in jail. Trials are risky, Brad explained calmly. A jury can be unpredictable. This deal guarantees a felony conviction. She will be a convicted felon for the rest of her life. It will affect every job application, every apartment rental. She will be under the thumb of the justice system for years. It's not nothing. But it felt like nothing. It felt like she was getting away with it. I hung up, my mind reeling. That night I called Jonah. I sobbed. I raged. I told him how unfair it was that Jessica might walk free after what she'd done. Is she walking free? Jonah asked gently. Or is she being put in a cage of consequences that will follow her everywhere? Justice isn't always a locked door. Sometimes it's a long road with no exits. The goal was always to protect Gianna and ensure Jessica could never hurt another child. Does this deal accomplish that? His words cut through my rage. A trial was for revenge. A plea deal could be for protection. The next morning, I called Brad back. I'll consider a plea, I said, my voice steady. But not that one. We're going to make our own terms. For the next week, Brad, Alina, and I worked on a counteroffer. We drafted a list of conditions that would serve not as punishment, but as a life sentence of accountability. 3 weeks later, we were all gathered in court for Jessica to formally accept the agreement. She stood before the judge, looking thin and angry. She had to read a prepared statement, admitting that she knowingly delayed bringing Mason's EpiPen, despite being told he was in anaphylactic shock, and that her delay was a substantial factor in his death. Her voice was flat and resentful, and she never once looked at me. Then it was my turn to read my victim impact statement. I didn't look at Jessica either. I spoke to the judge, to the court, to the memory of my brother. I didn't talk about hate or anger. I talked about what the world had lost. We lost a boy who loved the color yellow because it was happy, I said, my voice shaking but clear. We lost a future scientist who wanted to build a rocket to visit the moon. We lost sleepovers and scraped knees and high school graduations. We lost first crushes and first heartbreaks and a wedding I would never get to attend. Her choice didn't just take his last breath. It stole all the breaths he would have ever taken. When I was done, the judge stared at Jessica for a long, silent moment. I have reviewed all the evidence in this case, he said, his voice like ice. And while this plea agreement avoids a trial, I want to be very clear about the severity of your actions. Your selfishness cost a child his life. It is a debt you can never repay. He sentenced her to 5 years of intensive probation. The conditions were ironclad. She had to complete 1,000 hours of community service, specifically at an organization that provided allergy awareness education to low-income families. She had to attend mandatory counseling twice a week for the entire 5 years. A single missed appointment would be a violation. Then came the most important part. Furthermore, the judge declared, you are hereby permanently forbidden from ever having unsupervised custody of any minor child. Not just your sister Gianna, any child, ever. Finally, he ordered her to pay $10,000 within 60 days, not to us, but to establish a memorial fund in Mason's name. A failure to pay would result in immediate jail time for violation of probation. Jessica's face went white. 2 weeks later, I sat in a bank and opened the Mason Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free EpiPens to families who couldn't afford them. Catalina was the first to donate. Within a month, we had helped 20 families. The local news did a story about the fund, and a mother sent me a photo of her daughter at her birthday party, a photo that wouldn't exist without the EpiPen we provided. Life settled into a new routine. Gianna was thriving in 5th grade, safe and loved. She wrote that she was sorry for what happened to Mason, but spent 3 paragraphs explaining how I had ruined her life, how the community service was humiliating, how hard it was to have a felony record. I read it once, deleted it, and blocked the lawyer's email address. There was nothing left to say. 10 months after Mason died, I stood at his grave with fresh flowers. The justice we got wasn't perfect. Jessica wasn't in prison. But as I looked at a new picture on my phone, Another child smiling at their birthday party, alive because of the Mason Fund. I realized it was enough. Jessica couldn't hurt another child. Gianna was safe. And Mason's memory wasn't a story of tragedy. It was a legacy of hope, living on in the children who got to keep breathing, playing, and growing up. It was a hard-won, heartbreaking piece. It was everything.